What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved talk show hosts pushes a little too far, and one of the industry's most private actors decides he's had enough? The tension in the studio was palpable from the moment Jeremy Renner sat down across from Drew Barrymore. What started as a routine promotional interview quickly spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history, culminating in a walkout that nobody saw coming. Before we dive into exactly what went down, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on in this situation. Trust me, you're going to have some strong opinions by the end of this. Drew Barrymore's talk show has become known for its warm, intimate conversations. She has this ability to make her guests feel comfortable, often getting them to open up about personal matters in ways they haven't before. But that signature style, that closeness she creates, was about to backfire in a major way. Jeremy Renner was there to talk about his latest project, a film he'd been working on for over 2 years. The interview started innocently enough. Drew welcomed him with her characteristic enthusiasm, complimenting his work and asking about the creative process behind the movie. Renner seemed relaxed, answering her questions with thoughtful detail about his character's journey and the challenges of filming. "You know, I've always admired how you choose roles that really challenge you as an actor," Drew said, leaning forward in that way she does when she's about to transition into deeper territory. "You take these complex characters and make them so human, so vulnerable." "I appreciate that," Renner replied, nodding. "I think vulnerability is where the truth lives in any performance." "Speaking of vulnerability," Drew continued, and you could almost feel the shift in energy. "I know you've been through so much in the past few years. The accident, the recovery, everything that came with that journey. How has that changed the way you approach your work now?" Renner's expression shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. "It's definitely given me perspective," he said, his tone remaining professional but cooling just a degree. "Makes you appreciate the opportunities you have." Drew wasn't picking up on the subtle warning sign, or maybe she was choosing to ignore it. "I can only imagine. And going through something so traumatic, with the whole world watching, that must have affected your personal life too. Your relationships, your family dynamics." "Yeah, well, that's all part of it," Renner said, keeping his answer brief, clearly trying to redirect the conversation back to safer ground. But Drew pressed forward. "You know, I've been through my own very public struggles, very public relationships, and I've learned that sometimes sharing that pain, being open about it, can be incredibly healing. Not just for us, but for people watching who might be going through similar things." There was a moment of silence. Renner shifted in his seat, and when he spoke, his voice was measured but firm. "I think there's a difference between choosing to share your story and having every detail of your life examined without your consent." The audience was quiet now. The playful energy that usually fills Drew's show had evaporated. Drew seemed to recognize she'd hit a nerve, but instead of pulling back, she doubled down, perhaps thinking she could charm her way through it. Of course, and I respect that completely," she said quickly. "I just think when we've been given these platforms, these voices, there's something powerful about using them to connect with people on that deeper level. You've always struck me as someone who values authenticity." "I do value authenticity," Renner replied, and now there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. "Which is why I'm authentic about what I choose to discuss publicly and what I keep private. Those boundaries matter." Drew laughed, but it came out nervous, uncertain. "Absolutely, boundaries are so important. I just meant that sometimes our most difficult experiences can become our greatest gifts when we share them." "Drew," Renner said, and the use of her first name, the directness of his tone, made it clear this wasn't a casual interjection. "I came here to talk about a film I'm proud of, that a lot of talented people worked incredibly hard on. That's what I'm here to discuss." The tension was now undeniable. Drew's smile faltered for just a second before she recovered, but the damage was done. The warm, intimate atmosphere she'd cultivated had turned cold and adversarial. "You're absolutely right," Drew said, trying to salvage the situation, but there was a slight tremor in her voice now. "Let's talk about the film. But I do think the film, your character's journey through trauma and recovery, it mirrors your own experience in some ways, doesn't it? That must have made it even more meaningful to you. Renner's jaw tightened. He took a breath, and you could see him making a choice in that moment, deciding how to respond. The character is fictional. I'm a real person. Those are two very different things. Of course, but art imitates life, and life imitates art, right? Drew continued, seemingly unable to stop herself. When you were filming the hospital scenes, did you find yourself drawing on your own time in recovery? Because I think audiences would really connect with knowing that. What audiences would really connect with, Renner said, his voice steady but hard as steel, is a good story told well, which is what we made. The rest is nobody's business. The producer in the wings was probably having a heart attack at this point. This was supposed to be a friendly interview, a feel-good promotional appearance. Instead, it was turning into a masterclass in how quickly things can go wrong when boundaries aren't respected. Drew seemed flustered now, her usual confidence shaken. Jeremy, I really didn't mean to upset you. I just think there's value in, being open, letting people in. There's also value in privacy, Renner countered immediately, in having parts of your life that aren't for public consumption, in protecting the people you love from having every detail of their lives analyzed and discussed by strangers. That's fair. That's totally fair, Drew said, nodding vigorously. But don't you think, as public figures, we have a responsibility to, be role models? To show that it's okay to be vulnerable? This was clearly the wrong thing to say. Renner leaned back in his chair, and when he spoke, his tone was colder than it had been at any point in the conversation. My responsibility is to my daughter, to my family, and to myself, not to perform my pain for entertainment. The word entertainment landed like a bomb. Drew's face went pale. The audience was completely silent now, the discomfort in the room almost unbearable. You could feel everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I never said anything about entertainment, Drew protested, her voice rising slightly. I'm talking about connection, about healing, about helping people who might be struggling. By exploiting my personal trauma on your show? Renner asked, and the question hung in the air like smoke. I'm not, Drew stammered, genuinely rattled now. That's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to have a real conversation. That's what this show is about, real conversations. A real conversation requires consent from both participants, Renner said. I didn't consent to this line of questioning. I made it clear multiple times what I was comfortable discussing, and you kept pushing. Drew's eyes were glistening now, whether from frustration or hurt or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. Jeremy, I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. That was never my intention. I just thought, we've both been through hard things. We could talk about that and maybe help people. You thought you could get a viral moment, Renner said quietly, but the words cut through the studio like a knife. You thought you could get me to break down or open up about something painful, and it would get shared everywhere, and everyone would talk about how raw and real your show is. That's what you thought. That's not true, Drew said, but her voice lacked conviction. That's not fair. What's not fair, Renner said, standing up now, is being invited somewhere under one pretense and then being ambushed with something completely different. What's not fair is being told we're going to talk about my work and then being pressured repeatedly to discuss my personal life, my family, my medical history. Drew stood up too, reaching out as if to physically stop him from leaving. Jeremy, please, can we start over? We can talk about whatever you want to talk about. We could have done that 10 minutes ago, Renner replied, already unclipping his microphone. But you made a choice about what kind of interview this was going to be. Now I'm making a choice about whether to stay for it. Please don't leave, Drew said. And there was genuine desperation in her voice now. I really am sorry. I crossed a line. I can see that now. Just give me 5 more minutes. We'll reset. We'll talk about the film. Just the film. Renner paused, the mic in his hand, considering. For a moment it seemed like maybe he would sit back down. Maybe they could salvage this. But then Drew, in what might be the worst possible decision she could have made in that moment, said something that sealed the fate of the interview. "I promise you," Drew continued, her words coming faster now, "if you stay, we can turn this around. People will see that we worked through it, that we had a real moment of conflict and resolution. That's actually more powerful than, a perfect interview where everything is scripted and safe." And there it was, the thing she should never have said. The confirmation of exactly what Renner had accused her of moments earlier. She was still thinking about the optics, about how this would play, about the narrative. Even in her apology, she was calculating the audience reaction. Renner's expression went completely flat. "You're unbelievable," he said. Not with anger anymore, but with something worse. Disappointment mixed with disgust. "Even now you're thinking about how to spin this, how to turn my discomfort into content." "No, that's not. I just meant—" Drew tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The words were out there, and they'd revealed everything. "You just meant that my pain, my boundaries being violated, all of this," Renner gestured at the space between them, "could be good television if we just package it the right way. Is that about right?" "You're twisting my words," Drew said, her own frustration breaking through now. "I'm trying to apologize. I'm trying to fix this, and you're acting like I'm some kind of monster." "I'm acting like someone who was told one thing and experienced another," Renner shot back. "I'm acting like someone who has every right to walk away from a situation where I'm clearly not being heard or respected." The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This had gone so far beyond awkward television. This was a genuine conflict playing out in real time, and nobody knew how to react. Some people looked like they wanted to leave. Others were filming on their phones, which only made the whole thing more surreal. Drew's producer was now visible at the edge of the stage, making urgent hand signals, clearly trying to communicate something, probably to cut to commercial, to stop this before it got any worse. But Drew either didn't see or chose to ignore the signals. "Jeremy, I have been vulnerable on this show," Drew said, her voice cracking slightly. "I have shared my struggles, my failures, my pain. And yes, it's hard. And yes, it's uncomfortable. But I do it because I believe it matters. I believe it helps people feel less alone." "That's your choice," Renner said firmly. "And I respect that it's your choice. But you don't get to make that choice for me. You don't get to decide what parts of my life should be public because you think it would be helpful or meaningful or good television." "I never said I was trying to decide for you," Drew protested. "I was asking questions. That's what interviewers do. They ask questions." "There's a difference between asking and pushing," Renner replied. "Between interviewing and interrogating. You asked, I deflected. You asked again, I set a boundary. You ignored that boundary and kept pushing. That's not journalism, Drew. That's just being invasive." Drew's face flushed red. "So now I'm a bad journalist? I'm invasive? I've won awards for this show, for these conversations. Hundreds of guests have sat in that chair and opened up to me and thanked me afterwards for creating a space where they felt safe to be real." "And I'm sure they did feel safe," Renner said, his voice softening slightly, though his resolve hadn't wavered. "But I don't. I don't feel safe in a space where my clearly stated boundaries are treated as obstacles, to overcome rather than limits to respect." There was something particularly devastating about the calm, measured way he was saying all of this. He wasn't yelling, wasn't making a scene in the traditional sense. He was simply, clearly, articulately explaining why he was leaving, and somehow that made it cut deeper. Drew wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. "What do you want me to say, Jeremy? What do you want me to do here? I've apologized. I've acknowledged I pushed too hard. I don't know what else you want from me." "I want you to let me leave," Renner said simply. "I want you to respect that I've decided this interview is over. That's all? If you leave like this, you know what the headlines are going to say," Drew said, and there was almost a pleading quality to her voice now. "They're going to say you stormed off, that you couldn't handle a simple interview, that you're difficult. Is that really what you want?" Renner actually laughed at that. A short, humorless sound. "You're threatening me now? Telling me how bad it'll look if I leave?" "That's your play." "I'm not threatening you," Drew said quickly. I'm just saying if we end this on a bad note, it hurts both of us. But if we can find a way to, I don't know, come together on this, to show people how to work through conflict, that could actually be really beautiful. Still pitching the narrative, Renner observed. Still can't help yourself. The producer was now on stage, moving toward them, clearly intending to intervene, to stop this before it became completely unsalvageable. But Renner held up a hand, stopping the producer in their tracks. I'm going to say one more thing, Renner said, looking directly at Drew, and then I'm going to leave, and this is going to be over. Can you just listen? Can you hear what I'm saying without thinking about how to respond or how it's going to look or what it means for your show? Drew nodded, tears now openly sliding down her cheeks. I know you think what you do here is important, Renner began, his voice steady and clear. I know you believe that by being vulnerable yourself and encouraging others to do the same, you're creating something meaningful. And maybe for some people you are. But vulnerability without consent isn't connection, Drew. It's violation. And the fact that it's happening on television, in front of an audience with cameras rolling, doesn't make it noble. It makes it exploitation. Drew opened her mouth to respond, but Renner continued, his words measured and deliberate. I almost died. My daughter almost lost her father. My family went through hell. And we're still dealing with all of that, still processing it, still healing from it. That's not material for your show. That's not a teaching moment for your audience. That's my life. That's their lives. And we get to decide what parts of that story are shared, and when and with whom. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras, the slight rustle of someone shifting in their seat in the audience. Every eye was fixed on Renner, watching him deliver what felt less like a confrontation now and more like a statement of principle. You keep talking about helping people, about being real, about connection, Renner went on. But real connection doesn't happen when one person is pushing and the other person is defending. It doesn't happen when boundaries are treated as something to negotiate rather than respect. You want to help people? Teach them that it's okay to say no. Teach them that their privacy matters. Teach them that they don't owe anyone their trauma just because someone asks for it nicely. Drew was fully crying now, but to her credit, she was listening. Really listening, perhaps for the first time since the interview started. She wasn't interrupting, wasn't defending, wasn't calculating her response. She was just hearing him. I don't think you're a bad person, Renner said, and his voice softened just slightly. I think you've built something here where vulnerability is currency, and you've gotten so used to trading in it that you've forgotten not everyone wants to participate in that economy. I think you genuinely believe you're doing something good. But impact matters more than intention, and the impact of what happened here today is that I feel disrespected and unheard. He paused, letting those words settle over the room like dust after an explosion. So I'm leaving, he concluded, not because I can't handle tough questions, not because I'm difficult or precious or any of the other things people might say. I'm leaving because staying would mean accepting that my boundaries don't matter, and I'm not willing to accept that. Not for this show, not for any show, not for anyone. With that, Renner set his microphone down on the chair and walked toward the exit. Drew stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, unable to find words. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent, so they did nothing, creating an eerie vacuum of sound. As Renner reached the edge of the stage, Drew finally found her voice. Jeremy, wait! He stopped but didn't turn around. You're right, Drew said, her voice thick with emotion but clear enough to carry across the studio. Everything you said, you're right. I did push too hard. I did ignore your boundaries. I did think about the show more than I thought about you. And I'm sorry. I'm really, genuinely sorry. Renner turned halfway, enough to see her but not enough to suggest he was coming back. I accept your apology, he said quietly. But I'm still leaving. I know, Drew replied, nodding. You should leave. You should have been able to leave 10 minutes ago without having to explain yourself like this. I should have stopped the first time you pushed back. There was something rawly honest about this moment. Watching Drew finally, fully acknowledge what had happened without trying to spin it, or salvage it, or turn it into something else. It was too late to save the interview, but maybe not too late to preserve some shred of dignity for both of them. "I hope the film does well," Drew added. "I really do." "You deserve that." Renner nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and then he left. He walked off the stage, through the exit, and was gone. The door closing behind him felt final, like the end of a chapter. Drew stood alone on stage for a long moment, the camera still rolling, capturing her crying, her hands shaking slightly as she wiped her face. Finally, she looked at the audience, then at the camera. "We're going to take a break," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, to the producer, "Cut. Just cut." The screen went dark, and when the show came back, Drew was alone on stage, composed but visibly shaken. She didn't pretend nothing had happened. She didn't try to smooth it over or joke her way past it. "That was really hard," she told the audience and the viewers at home. "And I think it needed to be hard. I think I needed to hear what Jeremy said, and maybe some of you needed to hear it too. We're going to continue with the show, but I want to acknowledge that what just happened was uncomfortable and messy and real, and sometimes that's what growth looks like." It was perhaps the most honest moment Drew Barrymore had ever had on her show, but it came at the cost of a guest walking off and a conversation that would be replayed and analyzed for weeks to come. The question everyone was asking was simple but profound. Whose responsibility is it to maintain boundaries in a conversation? The person setting them or the person being asked to respect them? And when does persistent questioning cross the line from journalism into harassment? The internet exploded with reactions. Some people praised Renner for standing his ground, for refusing to perform his trauma for entertainment. Others criticized him for being too sensitive, for not understanding that public figures give up certain expectations of privacy. Still others focused on Drew, debating whether she'd been genuinely trying to connect or simply chasing a viral moment. But perhaps the most important takeaway from this entire uncomfortable, cringe-inducing, ultimately illuminating exchange was this: vulnerability is powerful, but only when it's chosen. When it's extracted, demanded, or manipulated out of someone, it stops being vulnerability and becomes something else entirely. And no amount of good intentions can change that fundamental truth. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment below answering this question: do you think Drew Barrymore crossed the line, or was Jeremy Renner overreacting? Let me know what you think.